Let's see what happens today in calling Papa home. We left off yesterday as Susanna was trying to figure out how she was going to ring the bell as Papa was off in the sugar bush. I ran to the side of our house where a metal pipe carried rainwater from the roof to a barrel. If I could climb the pipe and pull myself onto the roof, I could reach the bell. I stuffed Papa's logger mark inside my coat and hoisted myself up onto the barrel. The flat wooden cover made a loud cracking sound as I pulled myself up and stood. Slowly, slowly, any quick movement could break the lid and I'd fall into the barrel. I wrapped my fingers around the rain pipe and pulled myself up. I climbed every tree in sight when I was a little girl, long after Mama told me that monkeys, not young ladies, climb trees. So I wrapped my feet around the pipe just like I used to wrap my feet around the trunk of a tree. The pipe was smaller than a tree trunk. My leather boots slipped once, twice. I couldn't get a grip with those boots. I stood on the barrel lid again. Smoke stung my eyes. I bit my lip to keep from crying. I used my climbing tree. I used to climb trees with no shoes. That ridiculous idea popped into my head like a corn popping over a fire. I grabbed at my shoelaces with frantic, shaking fingers. I unlaced one boot and yanked off my gray wool stockings. I pulled the second boot from my foot with the laces still tied. The stocking came off with it. My bare feet against the metal pipe, I began to pull myself up to the roof. By the time I reached the roof, my feet were scraped and hurting. I didn't even look to see if they were bleeding. I grabbed the shingles and scrambled up. My fingernails scratched and scraped against the thick wood, shingle by shingle. I pulled myself onto the roof. Then I crawled up the slanting roof on my hands and knees. The logger's mark felt heavy and cold against my chest. Susanna! Mama screeched. What are you doing? I was shaking so much I couldn't answer. Inch by inch, I crawled up the slanting roof. The bell hung from the metal post at the very top. Every inch brought me closer to the bell and closer to calling Papa home. I could barely see. Up on the roof, the smoke was thick and choking. Finally, my fumbling fingers found the post and the rough metal of the bell. I pulled Papa's logger's mark from my coat and swung at the bell. Cling, cling. As close as I was, the gong of the mark against the bell made my ears ring too. Cling, cling. I hit the bell again, over and over and over. I kept on hitting. My hand began to throb. Then my arm, I used my other arm, though I was clumsy and almost slipped from the roof. I swung and swung and swung the logger's mark. Soon it felt like I was lifting 1,000 pounds every time, but I kept swinging. Finally, my arm wouldn't move. I couldn't lift the heavy mark even one more time. Papa! Papa! I cried into the smoke. Papa, come home! I slid down the rough shingles to the rain pipe. Mama must have climbed onto the barrel because I remember her warm hands pulling me from the roof. You did fine, Mama said as she wrapped her shawl around my head. Papa will come, and you helped him. I began to cry. I was supposed to help Mama, but instead Mama helped me. The air was heavy and silent. Mama pushed dripping blankets onto my arms. Can you carry these? I could. I had to. Mama shoved a wet blanket into Lydia's arms. She hoisted Nels up onto her left hip and grabbed another blanket. We ran. In the south, the sky was glowing red. In front of us, smoke and darkness hid the Peshtigo lights. We ran down our little hill. We ran along the road where I used to watch Papa coming home from the factory. We ran until our lungs burned inside our chests. Nels wailed. I grabbed Lydia's hand and held for dear life. We ran, clinging to each other like birds in a storm. Then I heard a rumble like a railroad engine. At first, it seemed far away. Run! Mama screamed. I dragged Lydia along. Other people were on the road too. Some stayed in their houses watching from the doorways. I glanced behind them. The southern sky glowed like a giant furnace. We ran to the river. Everywhere, people were shouting and running. Mama pulled us into the cold water, deeper and deeper. When Lydia couldn't reach the bottom, she climbed into my arms and wrapped herself around me. I saw a man trying to wrestle two wild-eyed horses into the water. One lady sat in the grass at the river's edge and screamed, I can't swim! I can't swim! I won't go in there! A boy floated by, hanging onto the horns of a cow. A man ran into the river with his clothes on fire. After that, I turned away and wouldn't look at the shore again. The wind began to blow wildly from the south. The roaring sound grew louder and louder until it filled the whole sky. The roar was louder than Nell's wailing, louder than the screaming lady. It drowned out every other sound in the world. Mama dunked the blankets into the water and flung them over our heads, soaked and dripping. Lydia hung on to me, and I hung on to Mama, and Mama hung on to Nels. We all prayed and cried and prayed some more. I could only think Papa was in the sugar bush. How long we stood in the water, I don't know. I could see the fire coming like a million white pine logs thundering down a wild, fast river. Fire climbed up the trees and burned them like torches. Fire jumped from tree to tree. Some people tried to escape by crossing the bridge, but on the other side, Peshtigo town was on fire too. Then the buildings burned. At last, even the air was on fire. Over and over, Mama dunked us under the water. I don't know how, but balls of fire flew across the river. The sky was bright, like a giant red sun was shining. All around, people splashed water onto one another and ducked into the river. I saw a lady float by, holding on to a log with one arm, splashing water on her head with the other. I could hear screaming and crying everywhere. The air was like a roasting oven, but the water was cold. Lydia was shaking and my teeth were chattering. Nels stopped wailing and moaned like a sick kitten in Mama's arms. Still, we stood in the cold water. I don't know how long we stood there, trapped between the cold water and the fire. People were crying. Animals howled and moaned. The air was filled with a crackling sound of fire and the crashing of falling trees and buildings. Some people called the names of their families. I thought of Papa and tried not to listen. I was shaking and numb. I leaned on Mama. Then I heard a voice calling above all the other noises. Lizette! Susanna! Lizette! Mama screamed, Johnny! She grabbed my arm and half dragged Lydia and me. My eye stung so badly I couldn't see, but I could hear. We headed toward the one sound I wanted to hear most in the world, my Papa's voice. Over and over, Papa called, Lizette! Susanna! Mama's voice cried, Johnny! Lydia and Nels cried out, Papa! We pushed our numb legs through the water. Then I felt strong arms around my shoulders. I felt Papa's scratchy beard against my face, and I heard his voice. We almost didn't make it out of the sugar bush, Papa said. The smoke was so thick, we were choking. I couldn't see, and Lydia was near to fainting. Then I heard the bell. Someone was ringing a bell. Nothing else mattered. I didn't care that our house was probably burned to ashes. I didn't care that I was shaking with cold and crying. Papa wasn't lost in the smoke or burned in the sugar bush. He was here with us. He had heard the bell. I had called Papa home. And these are real tears coming out. I think I got into the emotion of the story there. I don't think I would have wanted to be Susanna in those days. That would have been very hard. Now, remember, this is a historical fiction story. There were many people that died, but there's some historical accounts that did make it through the fire and with people that survived. And if you'd like to learn more, just look up Peshtigo Fire on the historical site in Wisconsin, and you will learn a ton of information. One of my favorite subjects to study.